Hey everyone, Nick Marzinski here at TrappingLight.com, and this is the second video tutorial that I'm recording on retouching techniques that you can do within Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. And in the first video that I recorded, I talked about the healing brush, and I used the healing brush to correct some blemishes on my daughter's face here. So this is, you can see in my layers palette, I've got the original background layer, and then I've got a healing brush layer. If I disable that and enable it, this is the before. So she's got some lines under her eyes here, a little freckle here, and then she's got some dry skin under her nose. When I turn the layer back on, you can see that all of those have been hidden using a combination of the spot healing brush as well as the healing brush. Now I want to move on and talk about another area of this image I want to fix, and that's right up here. She's got some hair that's sticking up above her head right here, and I want to replace that just with this white background. Now, this is a case where the spot healing brush is not going to work as well, and let me show you what I mean by that. Or, excuse me, not the spot healing brush, the actual healing brush. I'm going to take my healing brush, I'm going to hold the Alt key so that I can choose my sample point. My cursor here changes to a bullseye. I click on the white background to choose it as a sample point. I'm going to do this on a new layer, and then I start painting over her hair here. And when I'm done, you'll see what the problem is. There we go. Okay, what you can see is that it got rid of her hair, but unfortunately it replaced it with this sort of blurry, whitish, blondish sort of mess here. And that's the problem with the healing brush, and both the healing brush and the spot healing brush, is that they try and hide their effect by blending the retouch into the tones that are right around there. So when you're working on skin and you're correcting wrinkles or you're correcting freckles or pimples or whatever, it works real great because you've got a lot of skin area right around there to sample from. The problem up here, and I'm just going to delete this layer because it's pretty clear that it doesn't work. The problem up here is that I've got two very different tones. Okay, I've got this white background and I've got the blonde hair that's here. And so in this case, the healing brush doesn't know what to do. It goes, I want to blend this effect in, but I've got these two areas here that I'm trying to blend from. So I'm going to kind of average that out and give you something that I hope looks good. And it looks awful. So we can't use the healing brush when we've got this sort of issue where we've got very, very different tones that exist right next to each other, and we want to only replace an image problem with one of those tones, which is what I've got in this case. So I've got to use a different tool. And the tool that is really, really good at doing this is the clone stamp tool. Basically, the clone stamp tool is a very blunt version of the healing brush. The healing brush tries to blend an effect in with its content-aware fill algorithm. The clone stamp tool says, no, I'm not doing that. What I'm going to do is you're going to give me a sample point, and whatever you paint over, I'm going to replace with that sample point, and I don't care about making it look pretty. I'm just going to do the replacement the way wherever you brush. So it's a much more blunt instrument, but in this case, it's going to work really, really well because I can say, I want you to only sample this white background, and then when I paint over her hair, it's only going to be painting over her hair with that sample area that I take. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I even start is I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to label that clone stamp. Okay, and like I've said in prior videos, whenever you're doing any image corrections, whenever you're doing any retouching, whenever you're doing any tone adjustment or anything like that, you should always be working on a new layer. Because otherwise, if you're doing all of your corrections right on your image layer, if you ever decide down the road that you don't like the way that a retouch or a correction or something like that went, if you're doing it on the original layer, you really can't do anything other than to get out of the program completely and start all over. Whereas if you've got you're retouching on one of these other layers, then it's as easy as either deleting the layer or changing the opacity of the layer. It gives you a lot more flexibility. So always do your retouching on different layers than your image layer. So I've got my clone stamp layer set up and selected. I can grab my clone stamp tool right here, and I'm going to go over some of the options that you've got up on the toolbar here. The first one is the brush size. When you're using the clone stamp tool, and this is the same for the healing brush as well, keep the hardness set low. You want to blend that effect in. If you keep the hardness, if you have the hardness set all the way up at 100, whatever you do your stamping on, you're going to see a very hard edge. In the case of this circular brush, it's going to be a very hard circular edge, and you don't want that. So keep the hardness set at 0. I like to use a round brush. The size of the brush doesn't matter. It's the size of the effect that you need, so you can set that on the fly, but keep the hardness set low. The blend mode I have set to normal. The opacity and flow are at 100%. This selection here where it says sample current and below can be important. Okay, as you can see here, I'm doing my edits on a new layer. If this sample is set to current layer only, it's only going to be taking the sample from the current layer. So I can come up here, take my sample point right there by holding down the Alt key or the Option key, and then paint all over her hair, and absolutely nothing happens. And the reason why nothing happens in this case is because my sample layer it's only sampling from this layer, and as you can see in the layers palette, there's no data here. Okay, if I enable just this layer, it's checkerboard, no data. So if you're doing things the way that I told you to on a fresh layer, you need to set your sample to current and below so that it's going to take its sample from anything it sees here, which includes this image data on the bottom layer. So I can take my sample point, and then I can come and paint over her hair just like this. And the other thing that I should point out is that whenever you click and unclick the mouse, the sample point goes back to the original. So if I go here and then re-click, you can see that it just keeps going back to that original point. Okay, so now I've corrected that, and that looks okay, but you can see what I've also done is that there's a little bit of a problem here. I've introduced a little bit of a kind of a dent here in her hair, and that's not good. What I want to do is I want to have it be a really, really clean edge. Okay, now I could just simply be very, very careful with the brush when I do it, which is a little difficult because it is feathered, but there's actually a better way to do it. So let me start over with a fresh version of the layer. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab, I can choose my sample point. So I've chosen it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the quick selection tool here. Okay? And I'm going to select her hair. I'm going to select the part of her hair that I want to keep. So right here, this is all of the hair, and I don't have to be real particular about it, and I don't have to take a huge sample. All I want is the area right around here, and this right here is the hair that I want to keep. Once I've done that, I'm going to invert my selection. So I'll go up to Select and go to Invert. So I can hit Shift-Control-I. So what that's done now is that it's inverted the selection. As you can see, the marching ants are all around the image here, and you can still see the marching ants here. But now, instead of just selecting her hair, I've selected everything except her hair. Okay? So that's what all these marching ants all over are telling me. I've taken a selection of her hair, and then I've inverted it. So then I've said, okay, I've made this selection. Now make this so that this isn't the selection, but everything else is. That's what the select inverse does. Okay? If I click it again, now her hair is selected, and the marching ants are gone from the perimeter of the image. If I select inverse again, you can keep going back and forth. You're basically just switching your selection between selecting something and then not selecting it. In this case, what I want is I want it so that everything except her hair here is selected. And the great thing about the clone stamp, when I switch back to the clone stamp tool, is that now that I've selected everything except her hair here, when I paint over it, it doesn't matter how far into her hair I go, it's not going to apply the clone stamp at all. So that's a really great and easy way, and in that case I made it too far, but by making these selections, it's an excellent way to make sure that any retouching you do is confined just to that specific area that you want it to be confined to. And if you've got any hard edges here, now that I can deselect this, now that without any hard edges here, I can do my selection and all of those hard edges are preserved. Now in this case, I might want to go over it and just sort of feather it a little feather it a little bit because you can see that there's still a little bit of a, the edges might be a little bit too hard, and I want to introduce a little bit of feathering there. In that case, I would do it with a layer mask, and then grab my brush tool, and then drop the opacity real low, and make sure that I'm painting with black here, and then just go through and introduce just a little bit of stuff just to build it up so that that effect isn't quite as stark. But by using a selection to confine the area to where you want it, and then making your correction, and then if you have to do some further refinements to the edges, I had to do here, using a layer mask to do that will allow you to get these very specific edits where you can do these replacements with a clone stamp tool and then be able to alter that area in a very subtle sort of way. So that's it for using the clone stamp tool. Hope that you enjoyed this this tutorial. If you've got any other questions about retouching, please feel free to leave comments either on the YouTube channel or on my website at trappinglight.com. Again, my name is Nick Marzinski with trappinglight.com. Thanks for watching, everybody.